first, and then a separate sovereign parliament in Dublin first, and then by all means full and active participation of women. I think that's the best way I could put it, or at least that's the way I see it.
Yeah, okay. And what then, and you were saying earlier that in the new state, when the Free State was set up, it was quite kind of male dominated, and was her work kind of pushed to one side a bit? Did she not really have as important a role as she could have had?
Yeah, well, I suppose there's a few questions there, but first of all, from her own point of view, she supported the anti-treaty side, and she was 1923, November the 23rd, 1923, she was put into prison along with other women. There were many other women and men indeed who were in prison at the time for supporting the anti-treaty side. So she really couldn't play a role in the Free State because she didn't recognise it in the early government, or the Cumann na Gael government. She didn't recognise it, and she didn't want to be a part of it. And so her profile recedes over those couple of years. She is on the run quite a bit, and then after she comes out of prison in 1924, she really has to define a new role for herself, and she eventually does go into local politics. In 1925, she's elected as a councillor for the Rathmines Urban District Council, and later on then she joins Fianna Fáil. But so she has to redefine herself in this new Free State that she doesn't recognise and doesn't particularly like. She would have been very, very disillusioned with the early years of the Free State. There's obviously a lot of emigration, a lot of poverty. There's no improvement in the rights for workers or poor housing facilities in Dublin that she would have seen. Also, the country was very divided. The Republicans couldn't get jobs in the Free State, in the new state. So there was a lot there to depress her, because she was very idealistic, and the very, very things that she believed in and fought for, and lost friends who fought alongside her, were not materialising in the Free State. So she plugs away, especially in her constituency. She represents her people. She's very active in attending the meetings in the Rathmines Urban District Council. And she's advocating things like improved amenities, improved housing conditions, improved facilities for children, an end to discrimination of Republicans. And she just plugs away and tries her best. But unfortunately, the establishment certainly weren't interested in listening to her. And I think by 1926, by the time she joins Fianna Fáil, she's beginning to decide that she needs to develop a new role for herself, carve out a new role. She left Sinn Féin actually in 1926 and Cumann na Mán to join Fianna Fáil. She probably saw Fianna Fáil as the way forward at that stage. But she didn't live very long when she joined Fianna Fáil. She died very shortly after joining Fianna Fáil in 1927.
Do you think that with the kind of revisionist kind of idea and the way that since the centenary in 2016, the role of women in 1916 and as the Irish Revolution has kind of been looked at and been brought to the fore a lot more, do you think her role has been examined more? Do you think?
Yeah. You just asked. Could I go back just on something you asked me about what was she fighting for in 1916? I think that's an important question that I might not have addressed. She believed in the Socialist Republic. I mean, she believed in Connolly's idea of a social republic. That would involve, of course, independence, sovereignty, improved living and working conditions for all citizens, the redistribution of the land to the landless tenants, not landless, who didn't own the land, the end of landlordism. They were her ideals, I think, generally speaking, and she had great hope in them. And I think she still held on to those ideals even by 1926-27. Now, did she leave a legacy for women? Is that the question?
Well, just do you think that her role has been kind of re-examined more since the role of women has been looked at more?
Yeah,
in 2016.
There's been there's about 10 biographies on her, 10 known biographies, and the first one was written in 1933 by Sean Whelan, and the next one then came in, I think it was the 1960s. And then there was a couple then in the 1980s. So she received sort of on and off attention, if I can put it like that. Obviously, there's a couple of books recently written on her in 2016 because of the Rising. I think modern biographies such as Patrick Quigley, Lindy Nocton, and others just kind of off the top of my head. They're much more favourable to her, and they maybe have more sources to draw on, and they're maybe able to tease out her life a little bit better. I mean, she was not a straightforward woman. Anybody doing a biography on Markievicz, this was an extraordinary, gifted, but very complex and a very divisive woman as well. There were people in her own lifetime that didn't like her, I should say. Sean O'Casey couldn't stand her. Michael Collins, she irritated him, according to Sean O'Phelan. But there were equally people who admired her work and who stood by her. Helena Maloney, for example, Hannah Sheehy Scaffington. So she was a very complex figure, a very divisive figure, and that remains today. For example, someone like Anne Chambers would have said it would really have had no time for Markievicz. She would have seen her as someone who got far too much attention, above and beyond what other women got during the revolutionary period. So the point I'm trying to make is that her legacy, it depends on who you're reading, and it depends on whose viewpoint you're sharing, because some would see her as a remarkable woman, some would see her as a woman who really didn't make a huge contribution to the revolutionary period, that she was involved in a lot of things, but she wasn't a shaker and a mover in the many organisations she was in. Cumann na mBan, ICA, the Labour movement, Inina Éireann, she was involved in a lot of nationalist movements, but involved rather than sort of spearheading them and leading them, and that might be one criticism levelled at her. But I do think she leaves a legacy for women today. There's no doubt about it. I think Markievicz, she had, for me, I haven't read quite a lot about her. Notwithstanding her flaws, and she had some, of course, she was a remarkably idealistic woman. She did believe in what she believed in to the very end. Secondly, she was very principled to the end. She spent 5 periods in prison from 1916 to 1923, just over 2 years of her life in that spell, for her principles and for her cause and for her ideals. She was left penniless after the 1916 Rising. She lost all her property. She was not allowed under British law to own property after 1916, so she lost her property, Frankfurt House, and anything she had leased, and plus an awful lot of her own private possessions were ransacked. So for the last years of her life, because of her involvement in revolutionary politics, she was poor, and she lived among the poor. Oddly enough, she returned to her work with the poor in those later stages. So she is a role model, I think, for not just for women but for men as well. And in the end, her life was probably shortened for those years in prison. I mean, Hannah Sheehy Scaffington said that it's her belief that those years in prison, particularly in Aylesbury and North Dublin Union in 1923, those horrible conditions she lived in, shortened her life. So she sacrificed a lot for her ideals, and in that sense, I think she's to be looked up to, notwithstanding all her flaws and all her failings and all her shortcomings.
Yeah, she's a remarkable figure, whatever way you choose to look at her. And I just want to ask you a little bit finally about yourself and about your own background and how you became interested in the Countess.
The Countess Markievicz.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a history teacher by profession. I work in a school in Dublin, and I've been involved in local history for quite a long time. I mean, I now live in Virginia, so I'm involved in the Virginia and District Historical Society. I've been attending most of their talks over the last year or two. And I was asked by a member of that society, Sheila Courtney, would I give a talk on Markievicz. I had mentioned to her around this time last year, actually, that I was reading a book of Markievicz by Lindy Nocton. And Sheila said, that's great, you'll give a talk on her. So that's how I got roped in. But I became intrigued by her, actually. I became intrigued by her complexity, really, and I didn't know much about her. I knew the basics about her before that point, and so giving a talk at Markievicz has allowed me to delve into her fascinating life, her difficult life, a life really of two tales. I mean, privilege and background to ending up in poverty, living and working among the poor. It's an extraordinary journey, and it was a journey worth reading and worth delving into, and worth trying to understand why did she leave everything behind her, this class of privilege, all the high society friends that she mixed with and associated with, and she turned her back on everything she brought up to believe in. British rule in Ireland, even her own Anglican faith. She converted to Catholicism in 1917 when she came out of prison. She ended up being very anti-monarchy, which again would have been very untypical of her upbringing, because by and large, the Anglo-Irish community would have been royalists, would have supported all things British. But she turned her back on absolutely everything, and I want to know why. And I can't say I fully understand, because Markievicz was not straightforward. But I think I have a sense of why she did it. I did it because I think she believed that was the way to go. So that's where I'm coming from, I suppose.
Okay, no, that's great. That's great. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you.
Pleasure.